We literally save lives. We get a lot of stories of people who have been going to go to work on an electrical system. They were just moving throughout their day trying to do their work, and all of a sudden they saw that our unit was indicating. They were about to put their hand on that bus bar or that cable, and they stopped. They saw, oh, there's still power there, and they could have been either severely injured or dead.
Every year, thousands of workers are injured by electrical accidents inside industrial facilities. But today's guest built a company focused on preventing those tragedies before they happen. Drew Allen is the CEO of Grace Technologies, a company helping some of the world's largest organizations improve safety, reduce downtime, and rethink industrial innovation through electrical safety technology and predictive maintenance systems. In this conversation, we talk about innovation, leadership, first principles thinking, and the frameworks behind building products that save lives.
Before we dive in, a quick note. If you want weekly tools to grow and lead your business, sign up for my free newsletter at stevepreda.com/newsletter. Good day, dear listeners. Steve Preda here with the Management Blueprint podcast. And today's guest is Drew Allen, the CEO of Grace Technologies, the leading innovator of electrical safety products and predictive maintenance solutions that help companies maximize productivity and foster a safety culture. Drew, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Steve. I'm excited. I've really enjoyed your books, and they've had a big impact on our business. So great to have this conversation today.
Yeah, glad to have you here. So if you enjoyed the book or read Pinnacle and Summit Wise perhaps, then you're going to be familiar with this question. What is your personal why, and how are you manifesting it in Grace Technologies?
So my personal why is to lead a life of adventure and impact. And I think that manifests in our company. We try to be as innovative as possible. So we have often 30% of our sales every year we try to get from products released in the last 2 to 3 years. We try to take risks, not in kind of a willy-nilly way, but we try to be smart about our risk taking, but still make sure that we're taking risks and we're on the forefront of the technology edges. In our business, it's really easy to see the impact that we have. Not many businesses get to say that we literally send people home at the end of the day. We literally save lives, and we don't take that responsibility very lightly. And so it's a little way that we can kind of make a dramatic impact in the world. We get a lot of stories of people who have been going to go to work on an electrical system. They were just moving throughout their day trying to do their work, and all of a sudden they saw that our unit was indicating, and they were about to put their hand on that bus bar or that cable, and they stopped. And, they saw, oh, there's still power there. And, they could have been either severely injured or dead. And so we get those stories quite frequently. And so it's really impactful to hear that, to know that we're doing that kind of good in the world.
Yeah, I love that. And yes, I mean, it's dangerous. My son actually worked for an electrical contractor last year, and they told him the story that they were in big industrial facilities, and one of their workers was trying to fix a light, and he got shocked. And the only way to save him was to kick the ladder out from under him. And he broke his leg. And it was a pretty funny story, but it was a very dramatic story as well at the same time. So you want to avoid these kind of situations.
100%.
And I think what you do is really great. And focusing on the safety part is very important as well. What I'm wondering, because I'm a framework guy, and I'm always looking for new frameworks that people have come up with. And obviously in the Pinnacle system, there are a lot of frameworks, but you've been doing this for a few years, and I'm sure that you have come up with your own. And what is your favorite framework that is easy to understand for listeners, 3 to 5 step, and could help them improve their business?
My favorite framework really comes out of Jim Collins' work on the flywheel. Okay. And I think you reference it in your book as well, Steve. And I think if people can see their life in a flywheel, I think that it's really, really useful. And so in our business, our flywheel is relatively simple. And I think that there's probably a fixed number of flywheels in companies. And so our version of a product flywheel is as follows. We start with amazing new products and services. If we do that well, we can't help but excite our channel. When our channel is excited, it cannot help but get us specified by customers. Once we're specified by customers, it grows our revenues, our unit sales, and our customer base. And as that happens, we expand the power of the brand, which allows us to set high prices and deliver higher gross margins to be able to reinvest into R&D for amazing new products and services. And I think, while maybe there's a couple of pieces in ours, channel specific or whatever, we found that, most of my focus as CEO is just constantly figuring out, how do I push those pieces of the flywheel, and where is the current bottleneck in the flywheel? Is the bottleneck getting the specifications? Is the bottleneck the wrong product, right? One of the challenges in our business is, in a 12-month product development cycle plus a 8 to 12-month sales cycle for products, if I miss, I'm down for 2 years. I don't really know it early enough, because unless I'm really paying attention to the leading indicators, which we've become a lot smarter on in the last few years. A lot of business folks tend to only look at the lagging indicators, and they're not really clear about the leading indicators of their business or the correlations between their leading and lagging indicators. I will say that the most recent releases of Claude have made it super easy to be able to put in a bunch of variables and be able to actually figure out how correlated your leading indicators are to your lagging success. I haven't done that kind of work probably since college in a really, really deep kind of regression analysis, logarithmic way. And now Claude makes it so easy that if you can start figuring out those leading indicators to your future success, and you've got an 80% or 85% correlation, well, that leading indicator means it's literally 85% as good as your lagging indicator. And if that lagging indicator is your revenue number, that's a pretty good indication of like what you need to be focusing on.
Yeah, that's a great way to reverse engineer those leading indicators from the outcomes that you are targeting. I love that. So when you say that one of the flywheel cogs is for people to specify your product, what do you mean by that exactly?
We come out with the product and we get meetings with large end user customers. Okay. Our products are really sold into two major markets: the industrial market, meaning everything from where things come out of the ground, oil and gas, pulp and paper, mining, to all the processing industries downstream, which can include automotive, tire and rubber, consumer packaged goods, food and beverage, all those kinds of industries, and shipbuilding and naval yards and all these kinds of places, right? Well, to have complex electrical and control systems in a factory, someone is writing a specification document. And a specification literally says how something should be built, including the machinery, including the electrical systems. And so we want to make sure that our products from an electrical safety perspective are included in that specification document. And so we've been really fortunate to get on some of the world's largest companies' control specifications, whether, that's Amazon or Procter & Gamble or GM and Ford. These kinds of large companies really see value in our products from both a productivity as well as a safety increase perspective. That's really the key to our success, is driving specifications with large end user clientele.
Yeah, so it sounds like when you get specified, then essentially you baked in to their product, and then you kind of have, at least for the time being, you have a monopoly of supplying them. Is that the case?
Yeah, and some specifications are a little bit more open. They may say our type of device, or they may even also list out competitors, right? And then it becomes a little bit more of a street brawl when we're competing. But either way, we want to grow the market for all the products kind of like ours, not just ours, because we're in the safety business. And I think it's really short-sighted to be selfish. I think we have a lot more opportunity if the overall pie grows than just trying to focus on my slice of the pie getting bigger. And, I'm going to do the best I can to get my piece. But I think ultimately, electrical safety and electrical reliability in factories is a major problem. And it continues, the number of deaths and the stories that we hear and the injuries and the life-changing events, we hear those stories all the time, and we don't want that to happen.
Yeah, I love it. So your business is innovation driven, and you are designing these electrical appliances that increase productivity, reduce risk. What is the major success factor in being able to come up with new products along these lines?
Yeah, so I guess I'll tell you the biggest failure. Okay, so I'll use the failure to illustrate the point.
That's good.
As I think a 25 or 26-year-old, I was working with a customer, a very large publicly traded customer, and they liked our product, but they needed it in a different form factor, which was going to require re-engineering the product as well as retooling the product and going through all the certification process. And I just took it kind of hook, line, and sinker. And I thought that we were like really onto something. I maybe had delusions of grandeur and thought I was some Steve Jobs like figure that could just wave a magic wand. And by the way, I don't think that this is what Steve Jobs actually did. So I want to put that out for a minute. I think what we see from the outside as a consumer oftentimes is actually not the reality inside of the company. So I'm gonna put that there. But anyways, instead of taking small iterative steps and being able to quickly prototype, get feedback, I did a design. I only got feedback from that one customer before going and cutting the tooling and doing all the certification costs. And so it was like a $400,000 project. I think we still have inventory from that project. And this was 12 years ago or something.
Oh my God.
So what have I learned now? The best innovation happens through rapid iteration. Probably a lot of your listeners have seen the Elon Musk, the SpaceX Raptor engines. Have you seen this image, right? So you have this incredibly complex engine, that goes up into space. And then you have a second one that looks a lot more simplified. And the third one looks like it's out of some sort of sci-fi movie. It's almost like the Picasso bowl. There's 9 different bowls until Picasso gets it almost down to 2 lines and you still understand it's a bowl. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think a lot of iteration, what you see as a final product from Apple is actually a result of thousands of prototypes and iteration factors and constant testing behind the wall. For me, I want to test with my customers and you get a lot better feedback that way. I think the more rapidly you can prototype, the more rapidly you can iterate and really get consumer feedback, the more innovative your product is going to be. I really don't think oftentimes if you try to make too big of a leap, you can't get there. And I think 10% compounded is much better way than going 10x in one shot.
Yeah, it's kind of the Kaizen principle of continuous improvement in small steps. But actually, I was listening to this interview with Jensen Huang, and he said that he hated Kaizen because he wanted more going back to first principles and completely rethinking things. And I think Elon Musk does that too. I think he does both. So that's really interesting. I love Kaizen. I think this is a wonderful concept to continually improve things.
We do work with SpaceX. We don't do much with NVIDIA, a little bit, but not much. And while you can think from first principles, you still have to iterate on the prototypes, right? Yeah. You have to constantly try. And so you may have an idea from a first principle of where you think you can go, but you're not going to get there if you try to design this 100% flat out. You're going to do it through iteration.
Yeah, so you would need both. That's a really good point. So Drew, what is it that you're trying to figure out in your business right now?
So over the last 12 to 18 months, our largest orders have come in through the data center sector. Back in 2015, 2016, I tried to make a push into data centers and we had no product market fit, just none. And so everyone was always talking about the data center business. And I was like, well, they're just not using our products. We tried, But what all of a sudden happened was when you started to increase the power densities in data centers. And what I mean by this is you have 100 megawatts in a traditional data center hall. That's the same size as multiple refineries, multiple oil and gas refineries.
That's one data center hall. 100 megawatts, yeah.
And so the electrical risk has really, really changed. And so now there is product market fit. So now I'm trying to figure out okay, how do I set up the correct distribution channels? How do I set up the right kind of sales network? Because they definitely buy in a different way than our industrial clientele, as well as CEO, you always have to figure out, well, where are you going to focus your time? And so I've made sure that I don't want to lose the core identity of Grace through our core industrial business. And so I've had to kind of set up a separate group that really focuses in on that. That also means getting a board member who's really knowledgeable in the data center space. But right now that's a huge growth area for us. And so figuring that out has been super key. The other thing that over the last few years, we've launched an incredible amount of new products, but a lot of these new products, I would say, were necessary innovations where it was we had to just execute on these quickly. And so we're actually getting into a point with our engineering team of kind of a clean sheet of paper where we're going to be able to really think about some things a little bit more deeply, maybe, kind of from first principles about where we really want to spend, where I feel we've been in a reactive mode the last few years. And so it's going to be really exciting to be able to kind of have some white space to really be able to kind of innovate the future.
Yeah. So you want to have that sci-fi engine for Grace Technologies that SpaceX has for the rockets, right?
Yeah, that's the goal. And our mission is accelerating the industrial world to zero downtime and zero harm. Until we get there, it's a lofty goal. And I think there's going to be a lot of innovation needed in order to help us achieve that goal.
So what's the process when you're trying to go to that kind of innovation, when you're rethinking something from first principles? Is there like a process for this that you can follow or you can work through, or is it about letting your imagination? It's like, when Albert Einstein, he came up with the theory of relativity, he was daydreaming in his statistical office and he had these insights. What is your process to that?
So one, we want to be really, really clear on the problem statement. Getting absolute clarity on what problem we're solving is kind of like the first step, right? Like if you don't know what problem you're solving, there is no amount of engineering that, you can throw at it that's going to make any sense. Second then would be understanding what the constraints are. One of our new product development efforts, we decided to move away from a digital platform and we went to a fully analog electrical platform because we knew that one of the main constraints was actually the size. And size is purely determined really by the power supply. And so when you run a digital circuit, you're operating like 100 to 300 milliamps. If you go to an analog circuit, you're operating in the microamp level. So you're literally at like 10% of the power requirement. If you're at 10%, you can literally make the power supply 90% smaller. So that's like a great way. It's much easier to do something in a digital system because you just program the microcontroller. You're not actually having to do the art of the analog circuitry. Right. And so I think like that's a really good example of thinking from first principles. It's like, okay, so we're solving this problem. One of the big problems inside of that problem is the size of the unit. How do we reduce the size of the unit? Well, we have to reduce the power supply. How do we reduce the power supply? Well, we reduce the power draw off of the circuit. And how do we reduce the power draw? Well, we go at analog. And I think that that's a pretty good, and how do we get there though? The amount of prototypes and the iterations that we've done on that, probably in the last 12 months, probably 75 major iterations on that circuit and, a ton of prototypes and a ton of testing and probably tweaks that haven't hit my radar. But I think like that's a really good example. I know I'm being a little nerdy for this podcast, but I think it's a really good example of that. I mean, also like if you take our sales engine, right, take it out of engineering land for a minute, ultimately like what drives sales? Well, you have to have unique selling conversations with customers. Everything I focus on is like, how do I maximize those selling conversations? So getting people interested in the product and actually having the full presentation where we can kind of tell our story is kind of my North Star, if you will. I know that if we increase the number of those conversations, we're going to increase sales. And, obviously there's always optimization kind of on both ends then of those meetings of like follow through, follow up, making sure we're competitive, yada, yada, and making sure that I have good lead quality. But ultimately the big North Star in the sales function is how many unique selling conversations are we having with customers?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I love it. So this is a framework that I'm more excited about than the flywheel because we are almost 400 episodes in. Here is what I heard. So be clear on the problem, step number 1. Understand the constraints, step number 2. Think from first principles, that's step number 3. Build the prototype, step number 4, and perform iterations. Step number 5, essentially, the optimization. And with the sales engine, it's kind of a similar process that you described, but less technical perhaps.
Yeah, and one other piece too is in all of that, it all has to be time constrained.
What do you mean by that?
I think people miss that point. Is if you don't have any time constraint, it will literally take forever. So inside of your framework, you've got a time box. And I think that's a really critical thing. And now I like what Elon says about his timelines. He assigns a timeline that he thinks has a 50% probability of hitting. I think that's a really smart way to think about it. And oftentimes that means that, exactly 50% of the time you're going to miss it, right? But that's okay because you want to be at that kind of, you want to have that kind of flexibility in your system, but you have to be targeting it. If you don't put any time box, if you don't put any launch dates, if your business doesn't actually have, like we have a big trade show every fall, and we always try to get products ready for that trade show. So it acts as a really great time box for us naturally. And if your business doesn't have one of these like natural time boxes, you as CEO have to figure out how to have one.
Yeah.
Otherwise, iteration and product development and sales efforts, sales always has a monthly time box, and a yearly and a quarterly, yada, yada. But in engineering, it's important to always have that time box.
Yeah. And what I read about Jensen Huang, that one of the innovations he did was he created 2 of those overlapping time boxes. So instead of, there's a 1-year cycle, and he created 2 teams who were working on their 1-year cycle, and they were 6 months straddled. And then he could iterate twice as fast on your product. That was amazing. Also, I had a client who's an engineering software company, and their challenge was that they couldn't launch the product for 3 years because they were just perfectionists. And then we talked about, okay, let's put a stake in the ground, make sure that we have a release every year. And okay, we might have to change the scope and limit it and reduce it, but use it as a forcing function. And then suddenly the product started to gain a lot more traction. That's a fantastic comment.
Yeah, I was advising a company, one of the companies that we're invested in. I was actually on a call with them yesterday, and they're kind of starting to run out of some time, right? That was literally the conversation I had is, okay, well, we had this wish list, we had this dream kind of product development idea. Now, what can we get done in 3 months? So let's strip everything out that now we can't, and then that will go into the next iteration cycle. But I think it's super critical. You've got to put a stake in the ground and force those things through.
Yeah, constraints create creativity. Yeah, that's fantastic. So the ultimate question, I have one more just to wrap things up. But if you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing you would want to fix inside of your company in the next 12 months?
I think we have a lot of relatively new and young salespeople. We live in a technical field, and trying to get them to understand the application space from a technical perspective is really difficult. And when you're selling to engineers, they can really sniff out if you don't know what you're talking about. And so it's like, how do you cram 20 years of experience into a brand new sales business development person in a few months? And really trying to compress that, I think, is actually one of our biggest challenges. We're trying to use AI. It's trying to visualize like the kind of equipment that we go on. And frankly, look, I mean, I've been at this for a while. I'm always running into new stuff that I don't understand, but I have enough that I can have a relatively technical discussion, be able to understand it, understand the constraints, work through the problem sets. But to really compress the knowledge into a quicker training timeframe, we've definitely found to be a challenge. I'm also opening up sales and engineering office down in Austin. So I'm going to be moving down in June. And so starting up a whole nother kind of R&D facility down there is the plan. That's one of my time boxes for kind of the next 12 months is really getting that all up and running. But probably from a more holistic perspective, I think really nailing that sales knowledge piece is critical. I think on one of our product lines, hey, I would love listeners to give me ideas. We have a IoT condition monitoring product, and we've been super successful at selling pilots. What we found, though, is that it's been much more difficult for us to move from pilots to expansion than what we were originally thinking. And so we're thinking that maybe we're making the bar to entry on the pilots too low. So we're kind of selecting for maybe the wrong type of clientele that don't have the authority to actually make a bigger purchase, or we're missing something in the kind of through the sales process to help pre-succeed an expansion. Those are a couple of the areas that we're trying to address.
Yeah, love it. That's fascinating. So if the listeners would like to learn more about Grace Technologies, maybe you spark something in their mind and they want to reach out and communicate to you or have access to someone in your company to answer the questions about the products, maybe they want to have more safety and more productivity with their electrical safety equipment, then where should they go and where can they find you?
Yeah, Drew A at gracetechnologies.com, or find me on LinkedIn. I think it's Alan-Drew is my handle, but Drew Allen on LinkedIn. I love hearing from people. I really enjoy advising startups in the industrial electrical space. If you have a product idea or you've got a startup, I do a lot of advisory work, and we've invested in a number of startups as well. We're really passionate about having more innovation in the industrial world. I believe, that the reindustrialization of America is super important, and I'm a big proponent. And so love to support companies that are doing cool things in our space.
Oh, that's fantastic. So if you're listening to this and you have a startup in the engineering space, then definitely this is your opportunity to get mentored by Drew and maybe to get opportunities that you don't have yourself. So reach out to him. And if you just enjoyed this conversation with an entrepreneur who's innovating fast and who is working from first principles and time boxes and leveraging constraints, then definitely stay tuned on this channel because I have more wonderful guests coming on every week. So thank you, Drew, for coming, CEO of Grace Technologies, the leading innovator of electrical safety products and predictive maintenance solutions. So thanks for sharing your wisdom and thanks for listening. That's it for this episode. Keep moving your business forward. Subscribe at stevebreda.com/newsletter.